How has been your 2019?
It's been a rather challenging year, I must say, but again, it's been a good year in many ways.
On the balance,
I would put it more positive than negative.
I think always, whenever we come to the end of the year and make those considerations of what the year has been, in hindsight, you find that there's more good to really think about than the negative that has happened.
True, I would have to agree with that. While you're going through your tough period, it seems as though this is the greatest thing. It's like having on a tight shoe. For those 15 minutes or that hour you have on that tight shoe, every other reality is obscured. The best meal is tasteless. But once you get that shoe off, then you realize, wow, there's so many other good things that were happening even during that time.
Yeah.
So it's something like that.
And I guess now looking onto Christmas, people are looking forward to the good meal, and so that maybe washes over our brain and helps us forget all the bad instances through the course of the year.
It is a good time to look back and realize that maybe life hasn't been all you wanted it to be, but it was not as bad as you probably thought it was while going through.
Yeah.
There are probably few people who could genuinely say it's been a bad year in such a way that there is nothing redeemable from it. In my case, I could genuinely say there have been more positives than negatives.
And that's wonderful to hear. And for me, on the balance, Pastor, as well, I think 2019 just came with a whole mix of expectations, more so for me. But what has been, I think, most positive about this year is that I've learned so much about myself. I've learned so much about my own experience and really reframed even how I see failure, which has really helped me cope with maybe a lot of the disappointments I've experienced through the year, and even been buoyed by experiences that I never appreciated in the past that I'm coming to appreciate as being important, like spending time with family. And I have a son now, he's growing, and just being with him and spending time with my wife, I've found this to be such valuable experiences that are worth much more than anything else.
One of the things that makes 2019 a very great year for me has been the deepening and enriching of my marriage, which seems to have gotten to that kind of good wine category. They say as wine gets old, it gets better, and there's a vintage wine that say, wow, this is the perfect taste. Well, I think 2019 has represented that sort of vintage quality where my marriage seems to be getting deeper and richer.
That's beautiful to hear, Pastor. And I'm thinking now, as we are coming to the end of 2 years doing this podcast, Let Us Go Deeper, it has also been quite a journey. 8 seasons in the bag.
Yes, 8 seasons in the bag, and going on to our 9th.
I'm excited, Pastor, and I think looking back, that has been part of what has really informed my own spiritual growth, the material we've been able to deal with. And I'm sure even for our listeners, journeying with us through the last 2 years has really been enriching. The feedback we've been receiving, a lot of people have spent time listening to these seasons. They've really provided very positive words about the kind of value.
Very good feedback. And especially now that we are embarking on this new dimension of our podcast called The Pursuit, I am sure we're going to bring more people into this net of search for truth, and hopefully we have many more testimonies of people saying this podcast has been significant.
I guess you opened the gift right before we give it to the listeners, but that's the truth, Pastor. I'm really excited for what we are planning to do now moving into 2020, because between me and you, we've been really wrestling with what is the next best direction for us. How do we bring even much more value to our listeners and ensure that they're really benefiting, not only in a way that is
theological,
right,
and that kind of stuff, but practical, how to live an authentic spiritual life. And I think ultimately, everyone who calls the name of God, there should be this burning desire within. I am assuming there is that question is, how can I live an authentic spiritual life? One that is rich with meaning, that truly connects me to this God that I'm supposed to be worshiping. So I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, and so to our listeners, there you have it. As we look into 2020, we are really excited for what we've been putting together for you. And we are going to be embarking on this journey of really understanding the pursuits that we all have in our lives. I think for many, it may be unconscious, but there are many also who have really started wrestling with what does it really mean to live this life in a way that is purposeful and intentional.
And we will begin with the pursuit of authenticity. I'm kind of excited.
Yes.
The pursuit of authenticity.
Authenticity, and I think that's a word for the season in many ways for this age.
Yes.
For a lot of us, authenticity has become the central theme of how we want to pursue life. And I'm really excited that this podcast now is moving around to really wrestle with that idea. How do we genuinely live out lives that are meaningful, that are fulfilling, that are rewarding?
Let's get going.
2020, here we come.
Let's get going. 2020, here we come.
We want to welcome everybody to this last episode of our 6th season of Let Us Go Deeper, the podcast. I'm here with Pastor Enskip also. Pastor, welcome.
Thank you.
You've been away, and it's good to have you back here with us. And Pastor, as we wrap up after these 2 years, this 6th season, I'm just reflecting back on the journey we've been on and where we are now, in terms of the topics we have dealt with. And maybe in this season, the topic we're dealing with is so integral to linking up all the other themes we have been covering, because the leadership, the kind of examples and principles that Nehemiah and Ezra present us with, these remote and sort of hidden characters in Scripture, are what really makes the vision of the Scripture and of the gospel move forward.
Yes, by the way, it's our 8th season. Believe it or not, yes. Leadership is critical. In fact, I would say without leadership, nothing happens. Perhaps if we look at Proverbs 29:18, we get a glimpse into this whole dynamics of leadership.
It reads, "Where there is no prophetic vision, the people cast off restraint, but blessed is he who keeps the law."
Where there's no voice proclaiming, where there's no vision, the people cast off restraint. Some versions say the people perish. So we see vision on the one hand and people on the other. Where there's a vision, where there's a prophetic word, where there's instruction, it says the people will not perish. But if there is no instruction, no vision, no goal to go towards, then the people perish. They cast off restraints. They become chaotic. So I am saying there's a link between the vision and the people, and leadership is that link. Leaders link the vision to the people.
Yeah, and maybe even in simpler language, leaders link people from where they are to where they want to be, or where they aspire to go.
Yes.
Yeah, and Pastor, so just maybe to really frame this tightly around this story that we've been covering in this season of Nehemiah and Ezra, because these are remote characters. I keep insisting on that, and the reason is because for many of us to be able to delve into those kind of characters like Nehemiah and Ezra and pick these big lessons about leadership is interesting. I think in and of itself says something about Scripture and how so many gems are hidden in there for practical daily lives.
Perhaps the greatest examples of restorative leadership we find in Nehemiah and in Ezra. We have guys like David and Solomon, who were progressive leaders, who led the people onward, who built their nation. But when we see Nehemiah and Ezra, we see a nation that is floundering, weak, trying to find the identity and purpose, and we have these men to restore and to build. And so if you really want to see great example of leadership, we look at Ezra and Nehemiah. But before going into their lives directly and how they demonstrate leadership, perhaps we need to establish some assumptions, right? There are some presuppositions about leadership. How does that grab you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good direction to go.
Any group of people that has to come together and be a cohesive unit needs to understand what is our purpose, what are our core values, and why are we doing what we are doing.
In whatever field, in whatever aspect of life.
Yes.
Really.
In whatever aspect, whatever field, people need to know, okay, what are we here for? You know, what are the principles or the values that are guiding this organization, this group? What do we stand for?
Mm-hmm.
And okay, why are we doing what we are doing? It is always so pathetic, so sad to see organizations or even churches where people are just doing things without any idea of why they're doing it. They have no sense of what their core values are. They may say things like, our motto is this, but when you look at how things are run, there's no sense that what they just said
connects with what they're doing.
With what you're doing,
what
yes.
they say and what they do is at odds.
Yes.
As my friend calls it, it's aimlessness.
Right. And so, after a while, people tend to lose a sense of identity of why are we here? What are we doing? What are we hoping to achieve? And why are we doing the things that we are doing? And that is why sometimes you look at certain organizations who are still practicing antiquated methods from way, way back, and you say, but don't they know we have computers today? Don't they know that they don't need to have an application form that's 4 pages long? You understand? Because why are we still doing things like they did in 1950? That is when people have lost the leadership. There's no leadership there. There might be management, but no leadership.
And that's an important distinction to make, because I think people confuse those two. There are people who are good at the day-to-day operations, just making sure things, are moving along. But we need people who carry this maybe more abstract sense of the structure, that it's outside of the physical daily operations that need to be managed. And those are the leaders, the vision bearers, as we said a few episodes back.
I'm glad you brought that up, because really, the real purpose of a leader, the great purpose of a leader, is to make the vision clear, to clarify to the people being led, to his organization, his church, whatever, what is our vision? This is how it plays out. This is the picture.
And to keep it before the people.
Right. A leader has to keep the vision before the people.
Yeah, Pastor, I work for, one of the organizations that is a bank, that's a big bank. And I do see how even our CEO, one of the many famed successful executives, is always engaged in this process of clarifying the vision and what we're trying to do. And he has been successful partly because he's been able to constantly hammer home this very clear sense of where the goal is and what we are trying to achieve.
Yeah, you wonder why CEOs make millions of dollars while the actual people doing the work can barely pay their rent. It is because a successful CEO is one who is able to clarify the vision, cast the vision, that is, help people to grasp the vision, inspire people around the vision, and also to allow the people to embrace the vision. Because if your workers or your church members or the members of your organization don't embrace the vision, we have nothing. Successful leadership is the ability to allow these things to happen. Keep the vision before the people, make it clear to the people, inspire the people with this vision, and also help them to embrace the vision and carry it forward.
Yeah, and I think a point you made, that Pastor, that is interesting, and maybe we should go back to, is that this more expansive or maybe more popular characters in scripture like David and Moses, they worked in situations that maybe were already primed for success somehow. God was already guiding them to success. But when you look at the story of Nehemiah and Ezra, they're coming to a state that is very devoid of that sense that things are going to succeed.
They're coming to a dying church.
Yes, exactly.
A church that was once a powerful church, maybe 1,000-member church or 5,000 members, really pumping on all cylinders. And now there are a couple hundred members, disheartened, few old people, infrastructure is broken down. Yeah. They are coming to
and there
a dying church.
The leadership needs to be even that much more serious in terms of what it's offering as a vision and the clarity it needs to have, because otherwise the situation in and of itself is already crashing whatever the hope they may be that they will succeed.
There's a certain tenacity and humility that must be present in a restorative leadership that may not be as necessary in a formative or developmental leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Like Moses was the founder, quote unquote, of the nation of Israel as a nation. A formative leadership, that's the person who comes and says, hey, we're going to start this. This is what we're going to do, and goes out front and gets things done. That's a kind of leadership that's dynamic, that's powerful. You need somebody who is powerful and knows where he's going, so to speak. Then there's developmental leadership. After this thing has happened, but we want to expand, we want to grow. So there's a vision. Who cast the vision of how big we can go? Guys like David, Solomon, got a nation that was ripe for expansion and took it forward. But it's a different quality of leadership that's needed to restore, to rebuild an organization or people when they have lost hope, when they've been around for a long time, wandering aimlessly, quote unquote, through the wilderness. That takes a certain tenacity, perseverance, and even humility to come down with the people and help them to believe again in the vision.
Yeah, to believe again, I think that's an apt phrase to use here. And that's why I'm really impressed, even as we have worked through this season, about the work of Nehemiah and Ezra, because it's the kind of work that even many aspiring leaders don't desire, because it takes you down to a place where, in some way, the chances of success are not as big or as much as when you are in a progressive or developmental stage of an organization.
In fact, leadership is fluid. It is able to adapt to what is happening and create a vision casting that suits the people where they are. Management, on the other hand, says, this is what I was told to do. This is what we have always done. This is what we need to keep doing. No, we may not have the personnel. Let's say we're talking about a church where there used to be a great big band and a choir, right? With 200 members, like the Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. Leadership comes in and sees that there's no more music. Choir members have gone, whatever, and they build from that core and they adapt. A manager comes in and says, hey, we need to have music, choir. No, there are 5 people singing in the choir, but he still wants to sing a song that will require 200 voices. He still wants to have all the fanfare and all the thing that was once a part of this organization when we were pumping on all cylinders. And a lot of times in churches, especially structural churches like the Adventist Church, let's say the Presbyterian Church, where there's a governing body and there's all these layers of administration, what they send the managers, keep this machinery going, not really leaders, to say, where are the people? And how can we restore them?
And inspire them.
And bring them back to health.
Yeah. And that then puts before us this question, Pastor, of how do we develop this kind of leaders? How do these leaders come to be? Because it seems it's easier to be a manager, because you just need training on how things operate.
Yes.
And then you just keep the thing going.
It is also safe to be a manager.
Yeah, but then how do we create these people, leaders who are vision bearers, vision casters, people who are able to carry and be very dynamic in keeping in front of us the reality of what we are pursuing? You
asked a very important question. I throw it back to you. Are leaders born or are they created? You said, how do we form or create this kind of a leader? So my question is, are leaders born or are they manufactured? Are they created? Can you take somebody and make him into a leader?
I think in my own thinking, there are very unique traits for leaders. There are very specific traits that leaders need to have for them to be successful. And I think it's possible to mold someone who has those characters, but is not yet a leader. But it's very hard to instill certain attributes into someone altogether who is not set or who does not show any kind of inclination towards that direction. So I will say there seems to me that there is a sense that leaders have certain attributes that naturally come along with them.
I like that. In other words, a leader comes packaged.
It may not be refined. It may not be complete. It just may have the seeds, and they may need to be brought up. But they always have something about them that stands out.
Maybe this is as good a time as any to distinguish between positional leadership of delegated authority and intrinsic personal leadership there are many people who occupy positions of leadership who are not leaders. Would you agree with that?
Expound on it. Yes, I would. That's an interesting statement you make there.
To be voted president of a country or of an organization is a positional leadership where you occupy an office, where you may not in your own person possess the qualities inherent in effective leadership, but you are in the position. So people listen to you. Think about King Ahab. In all the Bible, and of all the kings that I've read in studying the scripture, I don't think I've met a more effeminate, cuddled, selfish, petulant, pandering leader or king as Ahab. Ahab was weak. He surrounded himself with yes men. He was selfish. His wife sort of controlled him. So in Ahab, we see someone who is in a position of leadership, who is not a leader. On the other hand, we have guys like David or even Josiah, who were in the position but possessed the qualities inherent in their leadership, which is why Josiah was able to bring about one of the greatest reforms in Israel and put Israel on the map once again during his reign. We have guys like Rehoboam, who was born into leadership position, like family delegated. You
inherited
leadership.
Mm-hmm.
But Rehoboam, when faced with the first major decision of his leadership, was blown out of the water. He had no sense of the times, of the needs of the people. In fact, he tried a strongman strategy like his father. He said, my father beat you with whips, I'll beat you with scorpions. My father's thigh is smaller than my finger. I mean, that's big man's word. And the people said, okay, you rule yourself then. Let's go home, Israel. And it was Rehoboam who caused that split in Israel.
And I think in there is something interesting about even leadership, Pastor. You can have the position, you can have the power to control and to be at the helm, but there needs to be this connection between who you are in that leadership position with the people that sort of passes along that vision so that the people can come behind you,
Yes. And that's why I say we need to distinguish between positional leadership, where I am placed in a position of leadership, but I am not a leader. I don't possess the insight, the clarity of the vision. I don't possess the ability to influence and inspire those that I lead while I'm in this position. And I can do great harm and damage during my tenure in that position. That perhaps is one of the benefits of democracy more than, let's say, some of these other systems, is that you vote your leader in or out. If he's good, we vote him back in. If you're poor, we don't vote you back in. Even this limitation of term limits that many nations have adopted that says you may be president for so many years and no more, was to prevent a weak leader, someone who is in the position without the qualities, being there for such a long time that by the time he dies or he moves out, your nation is destroyed. Shambles.
Yeah. And I think those are observations and recognitions that we need to constantly remind ourselves of, because as again you say, leadership being this dynamic thing that needs to be alive almost constantly, because people without that leadership are gonna end up being aimless. We have to keep asking, are we under the right leadership? Are we being moved into a direction that we aspire to? Is this the kind of leaders that are going to take us to that destination we're looking to?
Actually, people do that all the time. People know when they're being well led and when you're not. People recognize. You hear that word? People
recognize
true leadership when they see it, which is why sometimes from the very midst of the people, a leader rises. Even though there's someone who is in the position, you may have cases where people are following someone who is not in the position of leadership, because this person demonstrates true leadership. You may have a church where a pastor has lost his authority, lost his influence over the people because he has shown himself to be just a manager and a very poor leader. Yet there's an elder or someone in the congregation who is demonstrating true leadership. So oftentimes people recognize leaders because leaders are like, what is it? They say it rises to the surface. They rise to the surface. They just make themselves known. Have you ever been in a place where someone walks in and just by the way they speak, by the way they carry themselves, you immediately sense authority and leadership?
Yes.
So that's it. In fact, 1 Timothy 3, 1-7 could probably help us here in beginning to ask ourselves, what makes a true leader?
Yeah, 1 Timothy 3
1-7
reads, "The saying is trustworthy. If anyone aspires to the office of overseer, he desires a noble task. Therefore, an overseer must be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunkard, not violent, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money. He must manage his own household well, with all dignity, keeping his children submissive. For if someone does not know how to manage his own household, how will he care for God's church?"
Okay. Is that 7 up to 7?
7 reads,
Okay.
6 actually, "He must not be a recent convert, or he may become puffed up with conceit and fall into the condemnation of the devil. Moreover, he must be well thought of by outsiders, so that he may not fall into disgrace, into a snare of the devil."
Right. Of course, Paul is describing here spiritual leadership, overseer or bishop or elder, a church pastor, leader. But the quality of true leadership are transferable between the church and secular organizations. Spiritual leadership, political leadership, there are qualities that are transferable. Notice he mentioned his integrity, his sobriety, his kindness, his teachability, and his ability to teach, that is to cast the vision, to lead others to see. Notice he talks about having control of his own home and having a good reputation. He talks about him being faithful to the husband of one wife, showing that when a man shows that he loves his wife and his wife respects him, there's something about a leader, male or female, who has a good marriage. That intimate relationship kind of says something and telegraphs this is a good man. Many people who didn't like Barack Obama and some of his policies, who thought he was a socialist, etc., speak about what a decent human being he was. They loved the relationship he had with his wife. One of the few presidents, there was no scandal attached to him in 8 years in office. And that somehow allowed people to listen. When a man has control of his words, his temperament, that's why he said not drunken, it's a meaning you have control of your temperament. It invokes respect. And there is no true leadership without
respect.
There is no true leadership without
respect.
Yeah. You may have the position and people will listen because of the position, but they only listen because of fear and hoping that one day you will no longer be there. But true respect is always necessary. Because when a leader, even one in a position of leadership, loses the people's respect, what do you get? When a leader, even if he is in the position of leadership, I'm the king, I'm the mayor, I'm the president, I'm the pastor. When I lose that respect and influence on my people, what tends to happen among the people?
Confusion,
anarchy, even rebellion. People cast off restraint. Remember Rehoboam? The people said, "Hey, you rule yourself, we're out of here," and they left. Because without respect, you can't govern. You can't really lead people. And that is why if you want to know if you're a leader, read 1 Timothy 3, 1-7. See what those characteristics that are outlined there. And then you could begin to, as it were, use that as a template as you look at other leaders in the scripture. And of those leaders, we have like David, Solomon, Ezra, Nehemiah, Moses, Elijah, so many that it boggles the mind.
Yeah, and one thing that comes up there, Pastor Evan, as you read those attributes, is the fact that it seems to me that Paul is trying to establish the case that the leader needs to be outside of any kind of questioning, so that he can really focus. People can focus on the things they need to focus on. Because with all these other attributes that are being presented, if a leader is drunkard or is having all sorts of issues domestically, it distracts from what he needs to keep the people focused on. He becomes the center of focus instead of the vision becoming the focus.
That is so true. Where the leader becomes the center of attention rather than the vision.
Yes.
The goals, the purpose, which is why a leader has to be someone with integrity. Singleness of purpose. Why? Because if you're not sold on the vision yourself, you will not be able to truly represent it and inspire people in it. And even if your words may catch us off guard, we begin to recognize there's conflict of interest here. You don't really believe what you're telling us. You know the saying, you can fool all the people.
All the time.
Some of the time.
Some of the time, right.
You can fool some of the people all the time. But you can never fool all the people all the time. A leader who has no integrity, who is not single-minded and sold on the vision that he is pushing, eventually is seen to be a fraud. Because you can't fool all the people all the time.
Yeah. And Pastor Evan, when we go back to the case of Nehemiah, I'm thinking about even what you've talked about, these specific or peculiar habits that are characteristics that we see in leaders. And he's growing up in a secular government, right? And rises up and becomes distinguished. And it seems to me that there's always this pathway that shapes a leader to become the kind of person he becomes ultimately in terms of leading people. A leader doesn't just come out of the blue. His experiences shape him to understand even the people he's shaping, is leading.
A leader is born to the time and for the time. Leaders are created by the circumstances that produce them. So you said leaders don't just pop out of the blue. In a sense, no, they don't. Yet, in a sense, they do, because when the fullness of the time has come, when the situation is such that a certain kind of leader is needed, from the very masses, usually, not even from those who are delegated on top here, arises someone who sees the vision, who understands what is happening and what needs to be done. That's the greatest kind of leader there is. The Josephs. Do you remember Joseph?
Mm-hmm.
He's a slave in Potiphar's house. Then he's like a prison monitor, so to speak. He's a leader in this prison. Pharaoh has a dream. Now, Egypt is going to go through some really tough economic times. Downturn in the economy, if you want to call it that way. And who rises up? Joseph. Even when Joseph is telling, and I love this by the way, I call it my Pharaoh principle. Remember, Joseph explains the dream to Pharaoh. He says the 7 good heirs represent 7 good years of harvest. The 7 fat cows represent 7 years of plenty. And then the 7 sick cows, the 7 bad heirs represent famine, destruction. There's one vision, one message, but given in 2 different ways, So here what you should do, Pharaoh. Find somebody and appoint him over the estate. What should be done? And Joseph lays out the plan to Pharaoh what should be done. Do you know what Pharaoh does, Joel? He says, Joseph, why should I look for anybody else when you saw the problem and have the solution? He says, no, you will be the guy. I call it the Pharaoh principle. Why? Because many times in organizations, especially in churches, we place our friends and our colleagues in places of position that they are not qualified for. They have no clue what should be done. And so we spend most of the time explaining to somebody who should be leading what should be done. Explaining
how they should lead.
Yeah, explaining the vision to the person who should be casting the vision. Pharaoh was wise enough to recognize, I didn't know there was going to be a problem. None of these men knew there was going to be a problem. Here is this Hebrew boy. He's not even one of our race. Not even one of our people, but he sees the problem and he has the solution. Why should I look for somebody else when the leader is right here? It takes true leadership to recognize another leader and allow that leader to rise.
And
you with me?
Yeah, Pastor, and I think that's a very important point you make there, because that recognition, that ability to identify who among us or who around us here is able to take on the leadership mantle is so critical, and maybe even our churches today are struggling from that ability, and maybe, as you said, because of the tribalism and the nepotism, and maybe even the need to control things and not to let reality break out as it may. Yes. Because as again we see in Joseph's case, Joseph is an outsider. He's not someone who, he's not in the inner circle. He's not the person you will say he should take up next. It's somebody who comes from completely the left field. And so in that regard, if we are going to have the leaders we are seeking in our churches, we have to have the people who lead these churches willing to open their eyes and willing to acknowledge and realize that we can get people who can take up the mantle and cast new visions from even outside our own.
You waste so much time trying to explain to a leader what the vision is, how to cast the vision. There's no time to inspire the people with it and explain it to the people. But a true leader grasps, understands, sees the vision, and is so clear about it, he is able to explain it, to cast it, to inspire around it, and to help the people to embrace it. Leaders are born to the times and for the time. It creates leaders who have the qualities needed, be it to form, develop, or restore a people, an organization, a body. Like we said before, Joel, without leadership, nothing happens. The train stalls on the tracks, the bottom falls out from the barrel, chaos and decay ensue. Leadership is everything to God's church, to an organization, to our country, to whatever happens. We need leaders. Why? Because without a vision, the people perish. Without people, the vision perishes. Because you can have the greatest plan. If you don't have bodies to carry it forward, it dies. But what if you have people but no vision to unite them and give them purpose? There is chaos. The link between the vision, so your church, we want to win Wilmington for Christ. We want to win New York for Christ, whatever they have you. Yeah, that's your goal. That's your vision. But then how is that cast before the people? How is it presented in such a way that people are inspired by it? How is it presented that people are able to embrace it and go forward? That's where you need leadership. So leadership becomes the link between the vision and the people. A leader must be humble, but persevering. He must embrace the vision himself, be single-minded, be someone of integrity, be one who has a good reputation. Why a good reputation? Obviously. If I trust you, I'm more likely to follow you. Yeah. If I don't trust you, you could be telling me the truth. I'm going to be always suspicious. Kind of reminds us what's happening in our country today and in many churches today. Which is why in the spiritual leadership realm, and Paul mentions it, if a man loses integrity, if his reputation is tainted, he has lost the one thing that can inspire the people and carry them forward. He needs to step aside. And one thing before we close, Joel, leaders are human. Humans are known to have flaws and weaknesses and mistakes. Is a leader allowed to have flaws and mistakes and weaknesses?
I will say yes. And I will even further say that a leader is someone who's actually engaged in the process of not only exploring those flaws, but revealing them and accepting them. and not just barring them and sort of hiding them away. A leader turns his weaknesses into strengths in some way, or is able to do that.
If a leader is able, I agree with you. If a leader is able to manage his weaknesses and his flaws, be honest about them, seek to grow beyond them, it gives them even more power to lead his people. If he tries to hide behind them, ignore them, excuse them, or allow the narrative about them to get out of his hand, then as we said before, he becomes the focus rather than the vision. So as a leader, there's that delicate position we're in as leaders where we expect it to be without flaws, even though people know we have them.
Mm-hmm.
People know you're human. And as humans, they know you will have flaws, yet they don't want to be reminded of them. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
They don't want your faults to become the governing, the news.
Yeah, because they want to focus on the vision.
Yes.
That's really what is to their benefit.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why as leaders, we need to manage our weaknesses and manage our flaws in such a way that the narrative about them stays under our control.
And managing doesn't mean hiding or excusing.
No,
I think that's the important
point. It means
how
I control it, how I reveal it.
Yeah.
Those I have in my corner, like my Gethsemane gang, those who I could go to and say, no, I'm struggling with this. I have this issue. Could you help me? That's what it means. Having people around me who are able to support me and strengthen me in those areas where I may be, keep me accountable. Even any leader who has no accountability, who is not held accountable by someone, is a leader who will crash and burn, who will begin to abuse power, excuse his weaknesses and flaws, and then turn the attention of the people from the vision to himself and discourage people. And so it is ironic that Moses was a great leader, but he had a flaw. And when he allowed his impetuous nature to get the better of him and commit that great gaffe when God told him to speak to the rock, and he hit the rock, God said, Moses, you let me down. Not because you let me down, but what you've done has so eroded your ability now to lead the people. I can't allow you to lead them into the promised land. And Moses, after a long journey with the people, had to surrender leadership at a crucial time because his personal flaw got the better of him. He allowed himself to commit a public devastating lapse of judgment in the exercise of his office. Here clearly, in the exercise of his office of leader. And he had to step down. It's one thing for me to have my flaw, Joel, as a human being. It's another thing for my flaw to manifest itself in the exercise of my leadership, of my public leadership, and distort my leadership. This is what happened to Moses. And it's a warning to all leaders that we need to manage, control, have support for our weaknesses and our flaws. Because no matter how good we are, no matter how much good we've done, for how long we've done it, if that weakness, that flaw, that chink in our armor gets out of our hands and it becomes exposed in the public running of our office and our leadership, it destroys our leadership. We lose respect, we lose influence, and with that we lose our ability to lead.
Yeah. And Pastor, that's a wonderful way to even wrap this up. And I just, maybe to even complete this season, is to say that ultimately the leader who's set the greatest example, Jesus Christ himself, when he sets up on his mission to start the church and has 12 disciples, he is actually molding new leaders. Yes. And through the 3.5-year journey, he creates new leaders who take forward the vision. And he is the ultimate model of leadership.
Yes.
Successful leadership at that.
Integrity, soulness of purpose, nothing is going to deter him. Not needing praise and approval of others, but doing what the vision calls for. Mm-hmm. Nurturing other leaders, recognizing them, calling them into his inner circle, and training them to take over that he's the ultimate leader.
Yeah.
Because a true leader always creates leaders after him.
Yeah.
Because he recognizes that this thing has to go on and move on.
Beyond me.
And beyond me.
Because it's always about the vision, and the vision
It's
is always
about the
larger
vision.
than the leader. And I think ultimately, Pastor, as we realize that all human leaders will have their own failings and will fail us, and we will fail people even as ourselves as leaders, we ultimately know that in Jesus Christ we have a leader who did not fail us. We have a leader who ultimately not only came and showed us the vision, but actually died for that vision so that he could save us as his people, as his followers.
Paul came and was another great leader who also was willing to die for the vision. He says, look, I'm ready to be offered. To me to live as Christ and to die as gain. Peter was ready to die for the vision. He said, don't crucify me like my Lord. Crucify me upside down so that God may have all the glory. And all true leaders recognize that the vision is greater than themselves. Then their whole work is for the vision, not themselves. That is why today the prayer of every church member, of every American, every one listening should be, Lord, grant us true leaders. Be they in the political arena or in the church. Lord, grant us
True leaders.
true leaders.